Well, okay, so that mutual respect, that kind of getting to a realistic result leads me to my final question for today.
Sure.
We're here in New York. The Southern District of New York has that mandatory mediation policy. We're surrounded by some amazing mediators, Deborah Reich over at the EEOC, Marty Schein. Like New York City, I have always thought of as kind of the forefront of mediation for our field in a way.
Yes, I agree.
Mediation. Is it worth it? Is it a good use of time? I just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure, Vince, sure thing. And again, I really appreciate your perspective from the plaintiff's side on this as well. It's been a while since I've been the plaintiff's counsel in cases, but I will say that mediation, like I'm actually overall a big fan of it. So my perspective on mediation is that, like, as a whole, I think it's worth the time and investment, especially if you can say, like, maybe even uncover some blocks between the parties that are maybe keeping them from reaching a reasonable settlement. Maybe one that, say, compensates the plaintiff justly for what they've suffered without, say, an overinflated sense of, okay, here's $20 million, or something that, like, say, makes the defendant kind of aware that they did actually have some role in this, and they can't sort of just say self-justify or deny by making excuses. I think mediation can be great because often what happens is, like, each side gets so entrenched in their own viewpoint, and if you as the employer point out the weaknesses too often, the client can get resentful towards you. And if the other side points it out, your client just says that's just what they're paid to do. So a mediator kind of comes in saying, look, like, from the start, I'm going to wear a neutral hat and to point out, like, your strengths and weaknesses to you. That being said, I think not every case is meant for mediation, unless, of course, the court, as you pointed out correctly, may require it. Sometimes, like, if you get the sense that the other side just tells you straight up that they're not going to negotiate, they only want to see a trial or a 7-figure number, and it's rare, but it does happen, that you might find yourself, it might not be worth the time if you don't have to mediate. But most of the time, overall, I really think it's worth it because, again, trial becomes so expensive. It's such a wild card. If you can get to a certain resolution, and then maybe even help I try to say to my client, look, if you spend this much money and resolve this sooner without the wild card risk of litigation, the publicity of a trial, maybe you can take the money you've saved, my attorney's fees, and maybe bring me back to help you, like, how do we avoid this going forward? What do we do to correct what's happening in the workplace?
Yeah, I agree. That would be a great approach. And I think more and more companies are seeing that as the path forward, right? There's no more of this, we're just going to get hit once in a while.
Right.
No. Now there's this realization, we could do better. And that would both be great in terms of us being better human beings, but also great in terms of our bottom line, right? And people like you can advise on how to go about that. And I think it's so important. You kind of mentioned my perspective on mediation. For me, it all comes down to the mediator. It really does. You're going to have mediators who are just going to, I'll start off saying, I don't really like exposing my client to the defendant. I think it is, it's a bit detrimental. Emotions can ride really high in a mediation. And most of our clients, yours and mine, are not people who selected an industry where you have conflict every day as their career.
Right.
We said, you know what I want every day? I want to fight with people about hate crime, right? Like that.
We did,
right?
And
and most people, thank goodness, say, hey, that sounds kind of hard. I don't really want to do that. So exposing clients to that head-on conflict, I think, is a bad idea. But I also, I will often say, listen, we'll sit down on the table, we'll mediate, and we'll have our client present, but in a separate room. And we like it if you do the same. But we don't want to be in the mediation saying things where your clients, getting very angry. I've been spit on. I've had a guy try to fight me in a media, and it's one of these things where you're just like, sir,
this is a little beyond,
yeah. What? Why? None of this even makes sense. What are we doing here? And I get frustrated with mediators who don't care about the result They'll just go in there, they'll go in the room with my client and they'll say, hey, you got no case. You should take 10 grand. I'm like, pardon me? But then I hear
I'm here.
they went in the other room and they said, oh, you're in a lot of trouble. You're going to pay hundreds of thousands here. And defense counsel and I are in the elevator kind of being like, this mediator doesn't care at all. Just somebody cuts a check. That's all that matters to this mediator. The amount doesn't matter. There's no sense of equity or fairness. It's just getting to yes, right?
Yes.
That frustrates me. And I think there's this huge disparity in mediators. There's so many mediators who don't really know the business. Right? If you're a matrimony mediator and you want to get into employment law, I think that's we could use more mediators in employment law. But you got to practice the field for a while. Don't just come over here with no knowledge of the industry and say, pay this much. Hold on.
Hold on. She raised two excellent points. I think really, really good points there that I think about too. It's like what I hear you saying is about mediation. Some of the benefits have to be a certain conditions in place, right? So one, you want a quality mediator. That's what I was going to say too. It's like that. So someone who's really been around the block and experienced in the employment law realm. That's a really good point. I often look for that too. Are they seasoned? Have they been employment attorneys before? Which side? Defense, plaintiff, both sides? What's their background? And also, I think you mentioned your client, right? Because if emotions can run high, and it can be sort of a free for all where people say and do things and the tempers blow up. As you pointed out, a lot of people are not used to keeping a level-headed conflict. Like I've been, shouted at, screamed at by opposing counsel, hung up on the phone at times. I just think, okay, I guess they're not really, maybe not as polished at this as I am, to be able to discuss in a calm, assertive way, like, you are as well, like I can tell. And so, but our clients don't always know that. So I think like helping to prep the client from an emotional perspective in terms of, and being in a room, I think is a really solid idea. I found that doing Zoom mediations during the pandemic, in some ways, actually, my clients were on Zoom and I'm on Zoom, and they can kind of like feel less threatened, I think, by the person being right there in the room with them, and they have something to ground them. So it can be a mixed blessing, sort of. One hand, you're not fully connected as you are in person, but you're not fully exposed, because employers can get very emotional too. Especially as you mentioned, those mom and pop businesses that feel this is a waste of my money and time and I did nothing wrong. And then they blow up and say something about, that maybe they shouldn't have said, or maybe they're just so angry they make a comment that then gets, they threatened as interpreted as a retaliation. Like I'll tell clients all the time when I'm investigating a case, like what not to do, right? So if the person is accusing them of discrimination and they're still working there, and I've had employers ask, what if I fire them? I don't think you want to do that right now, short of some like horrible exit circumstance that the employee punched someone in the nose and this can't happen. But so I think you're right. People aren't used to conflict. And I think mediation can be maybe a good way to resolve conflict, but it has to be something where folks like you and I are on the other sides of the table, helping our clients to cope with the conflict that most people don't like to address.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I agree with everything you're saying. People have to actually want a resolution. That was one of your early points. And then I think the attorneys act as almost like bowling bumpers. When you're bowling and they have the bumpers for the kids, kind of keeps everything in the lane, like you don't want to go off the tracks too much. And with that mediator who has some knowledge, has a depth of knowledge about the field, and can kind of say to the client, sure, but what about this, right? And have you thought about how this is going to look? And I think that's really valuable. I agree with your perspective there. And listen, if you see litigation, it's better for everyone. It always is, right?
100%, Vince. 100%. Yeah.
Eric, it was amazing having you on. I hope we can have you again.